Which is interesting because I guess that's a good point, because there were 3 council persons on that committee, and I thought as a model, I thought that was possibly a negative in my going in, right? So I mean, I didn't really write about it or anything, but I remember looking at it thinking, oh, this is a potential negative, because of those 6 criteria or so, one of them is that we're going to be blind to the addresses of both elected and potential challengers, and yet we have 3 people who certainly knew where they lived on the commission, right?
Yeah.
And probably had a pretty good idea of where everybody else lived too, to be honest, and had a lot of deep knowledge on that. On the other hand, I didn't see much there that said to me, I mean, having watched most, if not all, the meetings, I didn't see anything there that said to me they were using that knowledge necessarily in that way while they were on that thing. I thought the 3 council persons did a pretty good job, right?
Yeah. So I don't think you can get away from redistricting ever being non-political.
Right.
The very nature of the city council has to vote on it, right?
Right, exactly. And they can make last minute changes.
They can.
Yeah.
They can. And so even if you have a wholly independent committee, you still have people electing those people to that post. So I think it's a fair argument, but I just think that if you're really in the mix of it, it's not really feasible to have it's always going to have some sort of level of politicking in it.
Yeah.
But what we did do for the committee is I met with everyone who wanted to meet with the consultant. I also was in the room.
Interesting.
So, we had that purposefully as the non-elected folks in the room meeting.
Right.
So, there wasn't ever a point in time where they're like, I live here and I don't want this, and this person lives here. That wasn't, I didn't see that once in the work that we were doing. And even chose 3 of the early maps cut some city councilors out of their wards.
Oh, I know.
And no one on the committee told me that until we got to a hearing and someone came up and spoke, saying he didn't want his counselor to be cut out of his ward. And I was like, I didn't know that had happened.
Yeah.
And my council members didn't tell me. It didn't even come back to me.
Yeah.
I now know that, that everyone knew what was happening, but it wasn't as though, and even the consultant, said, I don't want to know. We're not going to hear this. That's not part of this process.
Yeah.
And so I think it was just sort of fair that way that we were able to get to that point where the council entrusted me in doing that work. So a lot of the map drawing is really relied upon the consultant. So they take in the information, they take what they're given. So they're, Providence has lots of different state lines sort of weaving through it. And so we really have to be concerned about that. Kim Brace calls it spaghetti maps. And I think I really like that term because it's really what it is. It's sort of all over the place. And even for me thinking about it, like I always have to sort of turn the layers on and off because I get confused about which is which. So it's really hard when you just sort of see it on a map. So we really did rely on them to explain why lines were certain places because this had to move here. Otherwise, you have just a small number of voters here that couldn't be, and they were oblivious to where people lived. And we even heard it. I believe Miguel Sanchez had testified at one of the public hearings saying that we cut his opponent out. Yeah. And I don't even know who that person is.
Yeah, I'm not sure who that is.
And I think that was really noble of him to come forward and say that. I appreciate that. But on the other hand, I was also trying to be noble and stick up for our criteria. And we, that was never asked to be done. That wasn't.
Well, I'll say I know Miguel a little bit, having met him a few times, and I think there's an ability there, but there's also a practical political reason to say, well, I had nothing to do with him or that person being cut out.
100%. I understand that he's on the record as saying like he didn't ask for that. Yes, and
Yeah.
then I also am on the record saying
Right.
I didn't hear from anybody.
Well, in a
doing
fair
that.
redistricting, it's relatively inevitable that that's going to happen, right? 15 wards, 15, electeds, and 50, and maybe 15 opponents at least, right? So as many as 45 people could find themselves somewhere out other than they want to be.
Yeah. And I'll quote Brian Newberry here from the state hearings where
Yeah.
he's like, he had this really great, he was like, I understand we have to take all this to county. He's like, but the lines have to go somewhere.
Right, exactly. Right.
Right. And that was early on in the state process and always has really stuck with me.
Yeah,
That
I thought that was wise too.
I thought
Yeah.
it's not, and I know that the state process, no one was cut out or, what
Right.
have you, but the lines do have to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's where all the really hard decisions come in. And I think he even probably alluded to that too. And
Yeah.
we said that a lot in our work.